Hi, everybody. This is Silvio Canto in Dallas, Texas on Friday, April the 7th. And welcome to our commentary. Happy Good Friday to you. And I hope you have a great Easter weekend with your family. Usually on Good Friday, there are religious meetings and masses and services across the country. And then on Sunday, of course, the big Easter Sunday celebration with your family. So I hope all of you have a wonderful Easter weekend. Today, we're going to talk a little bit about what is happening up in Wisconsin, where they've had some interesting elections. But before we get there, I have a post over at the American Thinker today, that is on Friday morning, about the election of Chicago, where the city elected a pretty leftist candidate, and he just barely won. He barely won the election. It was a close election, but he's clearly a man from the left, closely associated with the public sector unions, and someone who is going to be facing some very difficult challenges as he takes over. One of the biggest problems is that they have a budget deficit in that city. And the other big problem is crime. And the other big problem is that Chicago is not growing. The population of Chicago population is not growing. So he faces some very tough challenges. And I think he's gonna be putting to the test a theory that former President Roosevelt, Democrat President Roosevelt, Franklin Delano Roosevelt, mentioned many, many years ago when he said that it was very difficult for public sector unions to govern because they were basically negotiating with the taxpayer. It wasn't like a regular union where you have management and you've got the employees, so there's an adversity factor. But with the public sector unions, you're basically negotiating with the government. And in the case of Chicago, it was the public sector unions who put the government in place. So I think it's going to be a huge challenge. And I hope everything goes well. But I wouldn't be surprised if it doesn't go well because you've got the crime problem. You've got, again, economic problems. You got cities or people moving out of the city. You have a huge shortage of police officers, and the city is not doing well. And I'm not sure that he has the right solutions for that city, but we wish him well. That's all we can do. We wish the new mayor well, but man, he's got some real challenges. Well, let's talk about Wisconsin. There was an election up in Wisconsin, and really interesting election that took place because on one hand, you had the Republicans picking up a special election that created for the Republicans a supermajority in the Wisconsin State Senate. But then at the same time, they lost the election, the high visibility election, which was an election to the Supreme Court. And they lost that election by like 10 points. The other one, they won. So, when I look at that, I say, okay, you just pick up the state Senate and you now have a supermajority in the state Senate and you have a Republican legislature. But then on top of that, you lose a Supreme Court seat by 10. What's going on? Well, I think a couple of things are going on. Number one, I don't think the Republicans had the best candidate they could have put up. And, once again, we come back to the question is up to the issue that candidates matter. Winning the primary is great, but if you cannot win the election, that's not good. The election is what matters, not the primary. So you have to make sure that the person you're nominating can compete and win the general election. And in the case of Wisconsin, that was not the case, but we saw cases like that back in 2022, where you had candidates for the U.S. Senate in New Hampshire, in Pennsylvania, in Arizona, in Georgia, who were the darlings of the base, but they couldn't win the election. And again, nothing happens unless you win the election. And here in Wisconsin, we saw something like that. Also in Wisconsin, the Republican was outspent 6-2, 12 million to like 2 million. Well, you can't, that's not, you cannot win elections where you're being outspent like that. And then on top of it, you have a weak candidate. I mean, there was money flowing into Wisconsin from all over the country, all the liberal interest groups all over the country supporting this lady who was running for the state Supreme Court. And then comes the question of abortion. I think the Republicans need to frame their message on abortion better. In Wisconsin, when Roe v. Wade went down a year or so ago, in Wisconsin, uh, you immediately put in place the previous law, which went back to the 19th century. So Wisconsin was operating under a 19th century abortion law. And the Republican legislature, for reasons unknown to me, did not come up with their own version of an abortion law. For example, 10 weeks, 15 weeks, or something like that, like we've seen in Florida, Georgia, or the heartbeat law that we have here in Texas. They basically left that one in place. So when you leave that 19th century law in place, what you're doing is you're giving the Democrats a message advantage, because the Democrats can say, oh, you want to have a ban on abortion, which is, of course, true given the 19th century law, but not where the country is. Most of the country is in a position where they want some exceptions to abortion, but they don't want long-term abortion. And that's the problem. If we're talking about a ban on abortion, then the Democrats win. If we're talking about exceptions to abortion and then no abortions, let's say after 15 weeks or something like that, then we're going to win that argument, because that's where most of the country is. So let the Democrats defend abortion after 15 weeks. And I think you're going to see that some of these elections are going to go different. And so this is a challenge. We have to come up with a better message when it comes to abortion. The message is, yes, we don't like abortion, but we're going to give women some opportunity to have an abortion, some access to an abortion because of rape and incest, and maybe 10 to 12 weeks, as we have seen in other states. That's really the solution. The 15-week solution, I think, is the one that is a winning issue for the Republicans across the country, and that's the one we should be defending. And I think if we do that, we're going to take this issue back from the Democrats. So there's a big lesson in Wisconsin. Your message on abortion has to be consistent with where the public is on abortion. And the public, again, they want access to abortion. They just want some restrictions on abortion, especially late term abortion. Well, the Biden administration came up with their Afghanistan report, and I think we can call the Afghanistan report the blame Trump report. Basically, they're saying we had no choice because, the Trump administration left us this plan and we had to follow the plan. It's interesting. The Trump administration also left a border policy that they didn't follow. The Trump administration left an energy policy that they didn't follow. So it seems like this was apparently the only one they couldn't change. Well, of course, it's not the Trump administration's fault here. It was the Biden administration and the way they did this thing. They could have said, we're going to get out, but we're going to get out in an orderly fashion, which is, of course, not what happened. So, yeah, they're going to blame Trump. They're already doing it. But I hope that the Republicans in the House put some of those people under oath, and that we can explain this to the American people, because the way we left Afghanistan was not the right way. Now, I'm one of those, and you've heard me say this before, but I'm one of those who believed that we should have left a military force in Afghanistan. And what we had to do was leave about 3,000 soldiers at a military base isolated from Kabul, but a military base that gave us a military presence in a very complicated part of the world. We want to be there. We want to be in that region. We don't want to be involved in Afghanistan's problems, but we want to be in that region. And we had a perfect base to do that, with airstrips of already equipment there on the ground. And we walked away from all of that. And it was when we walked away from all of that that the whole place fell apart. I also want to say something here on behalf of the Afghan army. I think we're really bad-mouthing the courage of the Afghan soldiers who fought to defend their country. And the problem is that, when the Taliban or when the bad guys saw that we were leaving, then, I think a lot of the Afghan soldiers said, well, if they're leaving, then, why are we fighting? And I think that's kind of what happened. It was almost the same thing that happened in South Vietnam in 1975. The South Vietnamese soldiers fought bravely at the beginning, but at the end, when we were pulling out and not helping them, they simply said, well, we're not going to be able to survive the invasion from the north. And I think something like that happened here. But a lot of Afghan soldiers fought bravely for their homeland, and we shouldn't forget that when we talk about Afghanistan. Well, one last thing, we mentioned the last time that the president of Mexico, China, inquiring about where all that fentanyl from China was coming from. And apparently the Chinese responded saying, we don't know anything about this. We don't know how that gets to Mexico. And that's kind of what you expected from the Chinese to say. I mean, what are the Chinese going to say? Yeah, we're putting this in Mexico. So, I think the president of Mexico was trying to change the conversation. But here's the problem. This is happening in Mexico, and it's up to him to do something about the fentanyl production in Mexico. And apparently, he doesn't want to do that. And that's then means that we're going to have to make some very tough decisions in the United States about the border. If we're not going to get cooperation from Mexico, then we're going to have to make some tough decisions on the border. Well, again, let me wish everybody a very happy Easter weekend, happy Good Friday, and a wonderful Easter Sunday. And we'll get back together again on Monday nights or Sunday night when we look at the situation in the country and around the world. Happy Easter, everybody, and we'll see you the next time. This is Silvio Canto in Dallas.